Hello, my name is Dan Frummel. I'm the Director of Non-Traditional Educational Programming with the Federal Programs and Oversight Team. And this presentation today is going to talk about the Consolidated State Performance Report for Title I-D, Subparts 1 and 2, and Title I-A Neglected. Thank you for joining us. The Consolidated State Performance Report connects to our strategic plan, Best for All, in several different ways. The neglected and delinquent funding has a lot of roots in whole child, as it works with children who are placed in various settings throughout the state. There's a strong academic component, as much of it looks at the academic performance of the students during their time in the facilities and the effectiveness of the Title I funding. Again, my name is Dan Frummel, and I'm the Director of Non-Traditional Educational Programming. You are welcome to reach out to me after this presentation with any questions that you might have. Erin Christian supports West Tennessee, and she is our Non-Traditional Educational Program Coordinator for that region. And Jackie Jacobson supports Middle Tennessee. Our agenda for today, we're going to talk about the purpose of the CSPR, some of the basic requirements, the reporting and evaluating, and then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the data collection, really the heart of what it is that needs to go into this report each year. And then we'll have a couple slides about data quality that talk about some of the common mistakes that we've seen in the past. All right, so the purpose of the Consolidated State Performance Report, or CSPR, federal funding for Title I, Part D, Subpart 1 and 2 programs is contingent upon the demonstration of student progress in their academic and vocational outcomes. And that's really where this annual report comes in. It is critical that the programs provide accurate data in order to assess these key student outcomes. And the collection of high quality data is important for Title I programs at the state and local levels. It's a basic requirement of Title I programs to use this for evaluation data to plan and improve subsequent programming for participating children and youth. It really takes us to the next slide that I think really describes the heart of what the CSPR is about. When we look at our Title I funding, when we look at CSPR, this is really a continuous improvement cycle where the CSPR really falls into the reporting, evaluating, and planning side of this cycle. So in July, we receive our funding, right? And then throughout the year, we monitor the effectiveness of the Title I programs in neglect and delinquent facilities. We're collecting data throughout the year, but that data is due in July of each year. And we can use that data to evaluate our program, to say, okay, how are we doing? Are we making improvement in the areas of math and reading? Are we making improvement in our vocational outcomes? And based on what that data from the CSPR tells us should really drive our planning for the next year. So for example, if we notice that our reading scores have gone down tremendously, then that might be an area that we need to focus our Title I funding in the program for the next year to improve those areas. Reporting. All right, so with the Consolidated State Performance Report, this is administered by the United States Department of Education, or ED, and it is required of all states. It is mandatory for all the LEAs that are receiving the Title I-D and Title I-A neglected funds. And what it ultimately does is it aims to measure the effectiveness of the facilities and programs. It's important because our funding is contingent upon demonstration of progress in the outcomes of academic and vocational. The reporting year, and this is very important, it's a full year that we're collecting this data. So it starts on July 1st of each year and goes through June 30th. So with the data that we're going to be reporting this July, that data collection period started on July 1st, 2019, and is running through June 30th, 2020. LEAs submit data for the following indicators, and we're going to really break down and talk about each one of these, but just to give you a high-level overview, we have student and facility counts, we have demographic data, transition services, academic and vocational outcomes, and it's important we'll separate that by within the facility and within 90 calendar days after exit. And then we also have academic achievement, or our performance in reading and mathematics. Evaluating. Again, and I talked about this earlier, but the data from the CSPR can be used to identify data quality problems, which can be used to improve data collection. It can inform key management and funding decisions. So again, using the example before where we had a facility that was struggling in reading on their CSPR, that would be a key decision point for them to look at on how they want to spend their funds for the next year. It helps to identify and disseminate promising practices based on programs that have demonstrated success. And it's used in the monitoring of facilities and programs. All right, I'm now going to spend quite a bit of time in the data collection section because this is really the nuts and bolts of it. This is filling out the forms that need to be submitted. A couple definitions before we get started. Excuse me, the first definition is an unduplicated account. An unduplicated count is one that counts each student only once, even if the student was admitted to a facility or program more than one time within the reporting year. So again, each student is only counted once in that unduplicated count, where a duplicated count is the opposite. It's an account in which the student could be counted for each one of their stays in the program. And so the example here is if Katie was enrolled in the facility from August to December, and then again from February to June, she would be counted twice. This is important because in our programs at times we do have students that are in a program more than once during a calendar year. They might go through treatment, or they might be in one of the correctional facilities. They finish their stay at the program, something happens, they're back in the program, and so then we have to ask ourselves, for this indicator, are we counting them twice or not? Another key indicator here, this comes into play when we look at our academic achievement, is going to be long-term students. So long-term students are those who have been enrolled in a program for 90 or more consecutive calendar days. And it's important to note that multiple admissions may not be added together. All right, so one of the first pieces of data that we're looking for in the CSPR is the average length of stay. And this is a duplicated count. So this number should represent the average number of days per stay for each type of facility or program during the reporting year. Students who have multiple stays can be included in this average. So we see that it is, again, a duplicated count. And because the data requested are for an average of days within the reporting year, the average length of stay for each program should not exceed 365 days. Obviously, pretty common sense. It's just, again, a good checkpoint to double check your data, make sure that you didn't hit the wrong button on the calculator. All right, the student count. So the student count, we report the number of unduplicated students and the number of long-term students. And this is information for the long-term students. Again, it's going to be needed for the academic achievement section. It is important that facilities report this data to LEAs when they send in their aggregated data in July. The start date for long-term student counts is when the student's enrollment within the facility begins, not necessarily when their educational programming begins. Again, another important piece, we understand that students enter and exit programs all throughout the year. The programs don't take a day off. And so there may be children that enter on a weekend. There may be children that enter on a holiday or a school break. And that's when their count starts, not when the educational programming begins. Again, the student counts are an unduplicated count. They're counting students for the CSPR versus the annual count. So I want to talk a little bit about this because sometimes this gets confusing. The criteria for being reported in the CSPR are not the same as those for the annual child count. All students who benefited from the Title I Part A or Title I Part D programming or services during the school year should be included in the CSPR. There's no length of stay requirements. With the exception of rare cases, this number will be higher than your census. And really, I think we could say in all cases that's going to be higher than your census. This is all the students that you served throughout the entire year from July 1st to June 30th. And so typically what we see is that programs tend to turn over every 3 to 6 months. So we would expect the student count to be, 3 or 4 times greater than your actual census. And so if your program can hold 10 students and you turn over your population about every, let's say 3 months, then we would see that number being multiplied there to get to our student count. Again, just to kind of break down the difference between the student count versus the annual count, the student count is that unduplicated count of students, or each student is only counted once, regardless of how many times he or she exits the program. So how many different students did you serve in that year from July 1st to June 30th? And it's used as part of the CSPR data to help evaluate program effectiveness. Again, this is different than the annual count, which is another popular term in the N&D world. The annual count is a duplicated count. This is the one that we use in October to do our annual count. It's based on funding. So that's just looking at a very specific period of time, and it's used for funding. Student count looks at the whole year, and it's used for CSPR data collection. All right, let's look at our demographic data. Again, it's unduplicated. So the unduplicated count should be equal to the subtotals for each demographic category, and all demographic category counts should be equivalent to each other. So an example here, this is a good way to check your math. If the unduplicated count of students equals 120 students, then the racial and ethnic total should equal 120. The gender total should equal 120. The grade level total should equal 120, and the age counts should equal 120. So we have 120 students. We got to make sure that our numbers always add up to that when we're looking at our demographic data. Areas that are looked at here, we report race and ethnicity in 7 racial and ethnic categories. We report the age of the student was when they left the facility, or the age at the end of the reporting year, so June 30th. So that would be if the student's still with you and hasn't left the program, and the age they are on June 30th. We report the grade level the student was in when he or she left the facility, or the grade level at the end of the reporting year, again, June 30th, if the student is still enrolled. Other areas that are reported are the number of students with disabilities, limited English proficiency students, and gender. Transition services is another area that's reported in the CSPR, and this is an unduplicated account. The transition services definition are supports and services that promote effective practices across multiple domains that impact a youth's successful return to the community. Reporting received transition services, only services that help a student return to and be productive in their communities through continued education, vocational training, or employment should be counted in this table. If your program or placement is unable to collect transition service data, please indicate that on the survey. Some examples of transition services would be developing an educational plan for the student for when they return to their home school, developing a vocational plan for the student, preparing students for re-entry into education or work, or identifying and providing supports needed to ensure students' success in returning to school or employment. I know many facilities have opted to use a transition specialist. That transition specialist is helping to arrange for the student to return to the public school, helping to facilitate not only records going, but talking to the school, making a plan for that student for reentry into the public school. That's an excellent opportunity to count that as transition services. Or if the facility is participating in an IEP meeting with a public school prior to that student re-entering back into the public school. Again, this would be another example of a great transition service for the student. Academic and vocational outcomes. This is going to be a duplicated count. There's no length of stay requirement. So all students may be included regardless of their length of stay in a facility or program. So even if you only have a student there for a few days, which tends to be the trend in many of our juvenile detention centers, you would still count a student in this area. It is actual and not anticipated outcomes, so the count should reflect actual, not projected outcomes. So if the student, they're projected to graduate from high school, but they didn't actually do it yet, then they wouldn't count. They have to have actually completed that graduation or completed that credit. And one student can achieve multiple outcomes. So the same student may be counted as having attained more than one outcome. For example, the same student may have obtained employment and returned to a district school. Another example would be, if you have a student that has a graduation or earned a high school diploma as a outcome, well, chances are they probably also earned some credits too. And so they would have multiple outcomes in that area as well. Multiple student enrollments are allowed, so the data for academic and vocational outcomes are not restricted to a student's most recent facility enrollment or exit period. If a student has multiple enrollments in a facility during a reporting year, all outcomes achieved should be included. Again, the example here, if a student is enrolled from September to December and receives a credit, that would be an outcome, and then is enrolled from March to May and gains employment, you count both outcomes. Student counts, not outcome counts. So these counts reflect the number of students attaining a specific outcome. They are not counts of the outcome itself. The example here is if a student earns 4 credits while in the program, this would only count as one outcome. So they get a check for earning credits, not 4 checks for each individual credit. All right, let's talk about academic and vocational outcomes in the program. So we're going to talk about in-program and then out-of-program outcomes. One way the data are collected is in the facility. And this is an area that historically we've done pretty good on collecting this data. And this refers to outcomes achieved or attained during any point within the reporting year while the student was enrolled in the facility. So the example would be the student received an outcome for obtaining credits while enrolled in your program. All right, the first section here only applies to the 90-day outcomes. Section 2, so section 1 we'll talk about in the second piece here when we talk about outcomes outside of the program. When we look at section 2, earned a GED, so this would be the number of students who earned a GED or high set while in your program. Obtained a high school diploma, the number of students who earned a high school diploma. It's an unduplicated count of students, and the outcome occurs either while the student is enrolled or 90 days after exit. But we wouldn't report the same student in both sections. Section 3, they earned high school course credits. They enrolled in a GED or high set program. They were accepted or enrolled into a post-secondary education. Again, all this is looking at while they're in the facility. Enrolled in job training course or programs, or obtained employment. The other way that we collect data is through 90 days after exit. And this refers to any time up to 90 days after a student has exited the program. And it excludes, exiting does not refer to transfer to another facility within juvenile justice or child welfare systems. A lot of times we'll see this from our juvenile detention centers, that when students are leaving there, they may be stepping down into a residential program. In those cases, we don't collect 90-day outcomes on them because their outcomes are now going to be part of another facility's CSPR data. So that would duplicate the outcomes. When we look at that 90 days afterwards, it doesn't have to be at that 90-day mark. It can be any time up to that 90 days. So you might decide that we're going to follow up as a program 30 days after they leave our program or 60 days after our program, and that would be acceptable. It requires that all programs receiving Title I, Part D, Subpart 1 and 2 funding collect these outcomes. And this was a finding of non-compliance when the department was monitored by Ed. So this is an area that we put an increased emphasis on in our monitoring for each year. These outcomes can provide vital data in planning and evaluating the effectiveness of your program. So one of the things that you might want to look at is, when students leave our program, how do they do in school? How do they do vocationally after they leave our program? This data will hopefully give you a glimpse into that and hopefully help to paint a positive picture or give you an understanding of where maybe some of the Title I funding needs to go to shore up some of those deficits. And so again, to talk about how to collect these, you must attempt to collect the outcomes for each student, and the attempt must be within 90 days of exit. The example, the transition coordinator contacts all students that have exited the previous 30 days on the 15th of each month. So as you can see in that example, they're not waiting until that 90 days to collect it. It's just within that 90 days. Also, it's important to note that not all students are getting their outcomes collected on at the same benchmark. Some might be 30 days after, some might end up being 45 days after, and that's okay. Another important piece here is to note the term is attempt. We understand that the students can be transient. Parents may be reluctant to answer the phone to talk to the facility after the student exits, and that's okay. There isn't a requirement that you make contact with them. The requirement is that an attempt is made. And we ask the documentation must be maintained to prove the attempt was made. And so an example would be a call log or email chain, and then outcomes can be collected through the caseworker for the child. Again, so this is going to look similar to our in-facility outcomes, but these are the ones for 90 days after. So number one, and this should be a fairly easy one to discover, did they enroll in their local LEA or school after they left you? Section 2 would be earning a GED, obtaining a high school diploma, enrolled in high school course credits, enrolled in the GED HiSET program, accepted or enrolled in post-secondary education, enrolled in a job training course or programs, and obtained employment. All right, and then the next area, the last area we have here is an academic achievement. This is an unduplicated count. And this is where we look at the pre and post testing in math and reading within the program. So this is while the student is in the program. So students should be getting a pre-test when they enter the program, and then a post-test at 90 days after being in the program or towards the end of their stay would be acceptable as well. For this, we only count students who have been in the program for 90 days or more. So some of our more short-term facilities like juvenile detention centers, they're not going to have this academic data because typically their students don't stay 90 days or more. If they do have a student that stays 90 days or more, then obviously they would collect that data. If a student has multiple enrollments, only count the most recent testing where the student was in the program for 90 days or more. And there are 4 categories overall for reporting reading and math achievement. So we look at it to see, was there a negative grade level change among the students? Was there no change in grade level? Was there improvement up to 1 full grade level, or improvement of more than 1 full grade level? And so you're going to want to have some sort of assessment that provides you with a grade equivalency so that you'll be able to complete this section of the report. Let's talk about how the data gets submitted. So step 1, all data should be tracked at the facility level as students enter and exit the program from July 1st to June 30th each year. Again, this happens at the facility level. It wouldn't be realistic for the LEA to be administering those pre and post tests and collecting that individual data on the students. That has to be done at the facility level. The facilities will then aggregate their data after June 30th before sending to the LEA. Then we will send a link to the LEAs, so the department will send a link to the LEAs to input information into an online survey, and the platform that we use for that is FormStack. The LEA should verify their data and then input the aggregate data from each facility into a separate survey. Example, if there are 2 facilities within this LEA, then 2 separate surveys will be completed. So again, 1 survey for each of the facilities. The LEA is the one that's putting that information into FormStack. And the department will review and verify the data before sending to Ed. When you're thinking about verifying the data, again, looking through to see, are there big discrepancies in the data from last year? If you have previous year's data, do the numbers add up and make sense? Is the student count a realistic number? All those things. The other thing that we're doing is that you'll receive a PDF file of the FormStack survey. And what we encourage you to do is to send that to the facilities. That way the facilities can see exactly what the questions are going to look like and can fill that out before sending it back to the LEA. The LEA would then input that data into the FormStack form. Again, breaking down those responsibilities, the facility is collecting the data on each individual student as they enter and exit the program. The facility is aggregating the data and sending to the LEA at the end of the reporting period, early July or sooner. And then the LEA collects the data from the facility, verifies the data, and then submits it in the actual online survey. Data quality, so again, this goes back, some of this I mentioned already, but this is good ways to verify your data. Look at your student counts. Your student count for the year should be significantly higher than your daily census. For example, if your program has the capacity to serve 30 students at a time, your student count will probably be between 60 and 90. Is your student count similar to last year? Did you have a dramatic increase or decrease? And if so, provide an explanation. Sometimes we see facilities might be decreasing or increasing their capacity to serve students from one year to another. Academic achievement. Do the results make sense? Some programs reported having an extremely high number of students making academic gains of more than 1 year. You might want to double check, just make sure this is an accurate reflection of student progress. You know, if a program reports that 100% of their students are making 1 to 2 years of academic progress, that's great, and I hope that's true, but you might want to question it. It's rare that we see 100% of one thing in a positive or negative direction. The demographics, the students with disabilities seem to be underreported in last year's data collection, so we ask that everybody take a close look at that. And then post-discharge outcomes, ensure that the program is collecting post-discharge outcomes and reporting those numbers to be submitted to the department. This is an area, again, that we've really harped on over the past year. It's an area that we really need to focus on. Some resources, we are supported by the National Technical Assistance Center for the Education of Neglected or Delinquent Children and Youth, NDTEC. This is their website here. They have some fantastic resources if you want to take a deep dive into the world of NND. And they also have a CSPR toolkit on there, and so you can kind of see where we get our information from when implementing these programs. In addition, when you receive this recording, you're also going to receive that PDF form of the FormStack survey and a copy of the PowerPoint. So those will be good resources as well to go back to as you have questions about specific sections. And then, of course, we are here to help you. So if you have any questions, if something comes up and you want to talk through anything in the CSPR data collection, by all means, please feel free to give us a call. Aaron Christian serves West Tennessee and Metro. I serve East Tennessee, and then my colleague Jackie Jacobs serves Middle Tennessee, and you see our contact information there. Yeah, and with that, that concludes our presentation on Consolidated State Performance Report. I hope that you found it helpful, and if you have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to the team. Thank you so much.